Construction makers.
We're just going to have a discussion. It's going to be a discussion episode about whether or not Magic needs standard.
Yeah, it's about 50-50 on if people like listening to our opinions on things, so I think it's a good time to discuss it.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
We're going to steel man whether Magic needs it and then whether it doesn't need it, and sort of see what kind of conclusions we can draw by just having a discussion about it generally.
Right, because right now, standard is pretty questionable. Obviously, is that Cauldron's taking over? We've done a video talking about this. I'm sure it's all over Magic News if you're chronically online like we are. And so really it's wondering, is standard dead? I mean, it's weird that standard was the primary format for many, many years and is now not even in the top two. I think they haven't even technically said if it's third,
Yeah.
Which I think is interesting.
So let's go back to the origins. Standard starts in 1985 with the introduction of what then was called Type 2. There's a sort of a split early on between sort of what then would become Legacy and what would become Standard. So you had Type 1, which eventually becomes Vintage and Legacy technically, and then Type 2, which inevitably becomes Standard as they sort of split up into additional formats. And I think at the time when they formed it, they really wanted to carve out sort of a smaller card pool that was easier for people to keep up on. Competitive play for Magic was spearheaded by a guy named Scaff Elias. For those of you that don't know, he's sort of been a part of Magic since the beginning. He has worked with Richard Garfield extensively on Magic and outside of Magic. And he really sort of was the person who advocated for Magic to be taken seriously as a competitive game. When
Scaff Elias kind of brought this up, it seems like there was a lot of contention at the studio, and that Richard seemed really on board, but Richard had somewhat of a competitive background, had an interest in reading about competitive games. And so I think Richard was an easy sell, but it sounds like the majority of the rest of the studio was not totally sold on the idea of competition. And Scaff Elias in particular, I think, was really pushing for the idea. It really seemed to be based around basketball as a selling point, and using the NBA as a sort of aspirational stance for spectators. So people that play basketball but aren't going to play professionally play basketball because they see people in the NBA playing basketball really well and they want to be like them. So sort of using that as an argument as we could create that same exact chain with Magic the Gathering players.
It could make a lot of sense to do that, right? Especially if you were perceiving your game as one that you're sort of wanting to elevate to the highest level that it could be. The highest level of any game is a sport, I guess, right? It's complete instrumental play in that there are clearly defined rules. There are referees that enforce those rules. Every player that's there is playing to win, and it's very much sort of playing to the extremes of the system, which is something we talk about a lot on this channel. So in those days, Standard was extremely important because you needed a way to sort of shrink that card pool to make sure that players were able to keep up with the cards that were being printed. And you also needed a way for designers to be able to control sort of not entirely all of the potential interactions of cards, but at least to be able to design with an informed perspective about what was possible.
I think it's important to consider that the constraints of their problem that they're trying to solve is that as far as I'm aware, I don't think there was any sort of major design problems that they were solving, like any sort of planned obsolescence or anything out of cards. I think it's primarily that they were trying to get a competitive audience, that they saw interest from players that wanted to play optimally and play in a competitive format, but they weren't providing a space for that. So their goal was, how can we make this competitively viable? And yeah, I think their solution was, well, we have to make sure that players are getting some of the best stuff, but they can't have everything because that's going to be insane to design around. So yeah, how can we make sure that not only do players play, but they're also continuing to buy the latest product because it's still a business.
And there's also this perspective of a competitive player that you want the best, most powerful things, because that is when you are at parity with your opponents. Everybody's playing the best possible cards, the best possible decks. You're all trying to brainstorm and do research to figure out what the best decks are, and your different teams are going to be bringing different decks to these tournaments. And at that point in time, because of that incentive to play the best, most powerful things, the way that you would sort of get players to buy cards is that you would have to power creep them. Because if you could play any cards that were ever made, then you would have to then base the power level on all of the cards that have ever been made when you make new cards. Otherwise, why would people buy those new cards? And so Standard is a way to refresh and turn over that soil every year, right, with new sets coming in and old ones going out, and then that's just sort of the optimization cycle can be reset in a systemic way rather than trying to just design stuff that is like more and more and more powerful.
And it's tough to say too where they got the overall data, right? Is this anecdotal data? Do they get a feel or a sense that players are interested in this, or is this something that they actually collected? And this is kind of something that I don't think we know whether or not they've like formally collected this, but this is something that I think a lot more companies do now versus what they did back in the day, especially when like they didn't know or expect Magic to be what it is. I think a lot of early game studios don't expect to accidentally make a hit, right? That has a ton of players involved, and now they have to solve these potential issues now that a bunch of players are involved. So it's tough to say if this was sort of a formal, like, oh, okay, actually, yeah, a larger percentage of players are actually interested in playing competitively or playing optimally, like doing that. Or, yeah, if it's just maybe those players happen to be culminating at local game stores, which made it feel as if, oh, okay, yes, most people I'm seeing are playing this way.
Well, and I think at that point, they probably already knew that there was kind of a silent majority, I think, playing the game, because they could see the sales data and they would know, like, okay, well, people are buying this game that we don't have any kind of contact with if our only contact with our players is through tournaments.
Right.
So
yeah.
You would at least see that, okay, there's something going on here, but we're not really sure how to contact those people. We're not really sure how to reach those people other than just make the cards and they'll buy them. So the people that we have direct contact with are the people playing tournaments. And we've talked about this before, that there's sort of this adversarial relationship between player and designer when you're playing at such a competitive level that I think pushes design to be the best that it can be, because any mistake you make is immediately shown to you through tournament results. If you mess up a set really bad, it's too powerful, it takes over the meta, you've got a deck that's completely busted, and players are going to be pissed because the meta sucks, but then also mad at you because you banned the cards that they spent money on. And it has this sort of circling the drain problem. And so design has to be really good to be able to execute on that level.
And I think we saw this pretty early, right? Where now it seems like any new card game that comes out, even in some cases, new game comes out, and very quickly I think players sort of adapt to those systems, because I think a lot of them, in some cases, are even borrowed straight from Magic, even games that aren't card games. But a lot of systems are like very similar to existing games, right? We've created a good culture of games that optimization seems to be like it's easier to get to that point. Back then, it took much longer. People weren't used to this game. They weren't sure how to optimize. And it took a while, I think, before we reached a sort of channel fireball scenario. But you could see that, like, by the time we got to that point, that was a situation where they were like, okay, well, we have to do something here, right? This is an issue that only could have been solved by players that optimize and play this at the highest level. And then they had to go and try and fix it based off of that.
And that's back even before, like, we had 60 card deck limits and 4 copies of each card, and like there's a bunch of different sort of like micro adjustments they made leading up to the creation of a sort of separate format for playing the game. Okay, so I guess just to summarize what we think are the best advantages to having a rotating format like Standard in your game is it helps you as a designer control the card pool and control possible interactions. It creates a subset of cards that players need to collect in order to play the game competitively, and it turns over that soil every so often so that the optimization cycle resets at a systemic level.
Right.
I think those are the 3 big advantages.
And it's not to say that like Standard is the only way of doing that. Right?
Yeah, you can do it in a multitude of different ways.
It just so happened, I think, that over the years of Magic, Standard happened to be the thing that grew to be the largest and most sort of socially accepted way of doing this, and the one that Wizards ended up putting the most support into.
I will say that and we're seeing the effects of this now, is that the Standard card pool being at that sort of 2-year standard with 3 or 4 sets a year, that card pool size, you can kind of see them, they may or may not be aiming the cannon on this now, meaning that like they're trying to see what the higher end of Standard can be by extending it to 3 years and releasing sets rapidly. But that card pool size of roughly 1,200 cards is manageable by the design team that they had at the time. And I think that at that way back when it first started, I don't know if it's 1,200 cards, but like I think peak standard was probably around 1,200 cards. There is a limit, right, to the amount of cards you would want in a card pool to be manageable, so that you can make sure that these undesirable interactions might not show up.
Yeah,
right?
I mean 1,200 is already a lot.
It's already
a
a
lot
lot
of different permutations of card combinations. I think we checked and we're at 3,250 some odd cards now.
Yeah, it's
so
almost
three times as much.
3 times the size of that standard used to be. And I think one way to look at it too is to look at like those 1,200 cards as being just like one game, right? Is like the game is those 1,200 cards. They're going to come out in pieces, but you can look at those 1,200 cards and say, okay, we're going to design those 1,200 cards. It's probably why they designed 2 years ahead of time, by the way. I'm wondering if that's the design cycle that they were on, and that's why. Is like then you can design an entire standard before it comes out for players, right?
I don't know if
as it comes out.
I don't know if they always designed 2 years ahead of time. They do now, but I think previously it was a year.
Well, I wonder. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure, but
Yeah.
I do wonder if that's the cadence, right? Is that you're designing that whole section
That's possible
at a
yeah.
time?
Yeah,
Which is weird if they're still doing that now, because standard's 3 years. So
that is weird, but they can't extend the time it takes for them to make.
probably not.
Yeah, because that's going to take too long to respond. I don't know if we want to get into this.
Yeah.
But I actually wonder if the 3-year rotation is because of the length of time it takes to make a Universes Beyond set. Because Universes Beyond is going to take more than 2 years.
Could be.
Due to how the development process works.
Yeah, and it's something structural on the back end. It's very
Yeah.
possible that that's the case. Yeah.
Anyways, just realize that.
Oof.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk from the flip side of the argument now. Why might Magic not want standard at all?
Well, we're kind of testing the waters with that right now, which is it needed? Are there more competitive players or more casual players? Doesn't mean that you can't satisfy both, but if your primary format is not necessarily the most viable in a competitive sense, which is Commander, I'm talking about Commander, then do you have a good enough space, right? Ideally, you want casual players and competitive players to be playing at least the similar type of format, 60 card, 4 copies per deck. Now, it could be that, it's Commander style decks. You have a Commander, you have 100 card singleton, etc., and that's the competitive thing. But if it's all free for all, right, then we've seen the sort of issues with that on a competitive level. And it's not the same game that was designed initially, so there's lots of cards. There's just lots of jankiness in general, versus it being all 1v1. The closest tie to like a competitive version jumping off of that I could see is potentially just taking 100 card singleton Commander and just making a 1v1 format out of that.
I think for me, the reason why standard might not be necessary anymore is that the player incentives have changed so much, right? When players are like, okay, we're going to be playing at the most competitive level. Our goal is to win and play to the extremes of the system. We are all sort of, I don't mean this in like a bad way, but like if all players are sort of rational actors, right? It's something we talk about with game theory. But like if players are all sort of acting rationally, then they will optimize to the extremes of the system and all be playing to win the game. But most players, I think Wizards is kind of finding out, they don't play rationally. They play emotionally. They play because they're just having a good time. And there's not necessarily that same kind of incentive to push the system to its extremes. And so if that's the case, then as long as sort of players have the tools in their own hands to sort of figure out what a good game means to them, then maybe you end up in a situation where standard is not really necessary, even if power creep is happening, because it's up to the players to sort of like decide what power level they're playing at.
Yeah. This, in regards to Commander, I think has been set sort of culturally, right, of being the implicit rules that, you're supposed to be playing for fun and not planning for optimization. It also leans towards a casual audience because of politicking.
So in that way, they sort of design systems, right? You can design a system to undermine the playing to the extremes of the system. And Commander is, I think, I don't think it was intentional to be designed that way. I think because it's just a free-for-all game, the politics overriding the system just happened. And then I think Wizards probably just saw that as an opportunity to steer the ship in a different direction.
And I mean, if we look at this in context of other games, if we look at something like Munchkin's designed in a way that it's not supposed to be taken seriously. I saw the comment talking about Munchkin. This will not be the video I explain what Munchkin is, because I don't know how to.
I don't know. Look it up. It's out there. But
it's
just a card game. It's a free for all card game. Silly. It's a silly.
One comment out of how many videos where we brought up Munchkin.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about that guy. That one guy.
That one guy needs to Google it. All right, because fucking he could have Googled it faster than commenting. All right, that's all I'm saying.
That's fair.
So if we look at a game like Munchkin is a game that really embraces this sort of free-for-all politicking, doesn't really matter about winning. You could try and optimize to the best of your ability with Munchkin, but it's largely out of the player's hands.
Yeah, it's all just direct interaction. I don't even think there's mana costs to pay for cards. You can just play whatever you want. You equip stuff to yourself as like you're a character who's going through a dungeon, and you're all fighting the dungeon and each other all at the same time.
I think the difference here is that Magic has two games. It's got deck building and it's got the game itself. And I think you can always optimize in the deck building portion, regardless of whether the game itself is hyper random or not. In Munchkin's case, in any sort of a game that's just within the box, it's not up to the players necessarily to decide like the level of randomization that's happening. And I think usually higher variance or higher randomization means it's a lot more difficult for you to have agency over optimizing. But by having this sort of deck building as part of Commander, it means that optimization is just always going to be a part of it. And it's going to butt heads with the system of the game that you're actually playing.
So I agree with you up until the point that there could be a different motivation for deck building other than optimization.
You're right. And that seems to be what they're leaning towards.
Well, and there's two things, right? There is culture, which is that players are basically saying, hey, you should build for fun and then play to win or whatever. That's sort of I don't know, I guess some kind of Commander heuristic, I guess. But then there's Universes Beyond. And I think in some ways this is partially why there's sort of this peanut butter jelly relationship happening between Magic and Universes Beyond, is that players can be motivated to play suboptimally when they're doing what we would call like role playing. And if you're building a deck that is sort of inspired by a character, or it's just a character you really like that you want to sort of personify as yourself in the game, then you might be fine playing them if they're suboptimal just because it's a character you like. Magic, I don't think has ever has had a very difficult time getting over the hurdle of making characters that people really relate to. I think some people like the Planeswalkers, but they have never reached the level of success as various superheroes, Spider-Man or whatever, right? So if we're trying to sell new cards, we can now do that through Universes Beyond.
Right.
It used to be we had to power creep things, but now we can just sell people things that they like.
Sell the same exact card even, but with different art. Some other character. Sure could. All of the three things that, for the reasons why you would want to have standard, are motivated by optimization. And I think that even with like the motivation to buy new cards, right? It's that you would buy new cards if there was no rotation. You would buy new cards because they were more powerful than the old cards. But if you're playing in a rotating format, they just need to be more powerful than sort of the other stuff that's in that format at that given time. But when we move into a player base that is no longer motivated by optimization, which I'm not really sure is the Commander player base. I think that a lot of people like to say that they like to think it.
That they're like, no, I'm not optimizing, whatever. But then, some of the most popular videos about Commander are about optimization. So it's interesting.
There's a reason that a new card comes out and you go, whoa, that's really good for my landfall deck. It's like, oh, is it? So you care about optimization?
Yeah. Yeah, it's true.
I think if you really don't care about optimization, you should just grab whatever cards you want from your pile.
Just grab a pile of cards.
You should actually just grab your favorite cards, regardless of color or theme, and you should just put it in a pile.
I mean, you do want your deck to like function and do something, do the thing, but what if the thing was just determined randomly? Is that fine?
That's true.
I feel like we're digressing.
Probably.
But okay, so these incentives for standard, I think, can be solved if the player base is motivated by something other than optimization. But the problem I think that I'm running into, I guess let's sort of start getting into some conclusions here. So I think part of the problem that players run into when they first of all, let's say they're not motivated by optimization. Let's just assume that, even though they might be. what then are they motivated by? And can you maintain that now? That they'll have a whole different set of incentives that you're trying to keep up, right? And I think that, Wizards at this point has sort of discovered that Universes Beyond is a way to maintain motivation for players, because they're just like, ooh, I know that thing, right? But I think that has diminishing returns, right? The next Final Fantasy set, is it going to do $200 million? Maybe in a day. I don't know. Maybe it could. This is kind of a weird anecdote, but when I used to sell my art at conventions, there were lots of artists that would do fan art. So the problem with doing the fan art, though, is that if you're an artist at a convention booth that's selling fan art, people aren't coming to you necessarily for your art. They're coming to you for the character, right? They're like, oh, that's my character. I want to buy your version of my character. But once you run out of the character that they want, they don't come back to you, right? They might. Some might, but a big percentage doesn't. But if you're doing your own original work, you end up establishing yourself and building more of a collector base that keeps coming back to you for what you do. Now, if you're a fan artist that does particularly unique fan art, maybe that also works. And I think that maybe that's the gamble that Wizards is taking, is they're saying, hey, Magic is unique and good enough of a game that we can continue to do this fan art stuff, and people will still play the game even if the Universes Beyond stuff doesn't necessarily appeal to them, because the game is good enough. It won't be people just coming to us for their character. They'll come for the character and stay for the game.
Right.
And we don't know if that's true yet.
I'm sure they have data on it. And if I were to guess,
I don't know. At this point,
true.
it's still pretty new. I don't think we necessarily know.
I think they've even confirmed that there's been data that's collected showing that, yeah, there are a lot of people that are getting in from Universes Beyond and sticking around.
So I know that they shared data a long time ago about the average life cycle of a Magic player, and it was 7 years. It used to be that you would play for around 7 years, and then they would see players take a break, and then they would see them come back. And that was a big part of how the game worked previously. I would be curious to be updated on it. I doubt they will do it, but it would be really interesting to see. And that's what I mean. We don't really know if that player life cycle has shrunk or not.
And that's a possibility. I think when it comes to the new incentives, it seems to be the incentives that they have are now just purely based off of theme. Initial, not shock value, but high level interest. We're seeing this even as they've shifted from this sort of storytelling of sets, of Magic-specific sets, into the newer sets that we're seeing in this year. That previously we were getting Outlaws of Thunder Junction, and we were getting Murders at Karlov Manor, and everything was very, very specific to a story beat. And it was a little too on the nose with the narrative. And this year we got dragons. And what else? Not Aether Drift. I don't count Aether Drift.
Mario Kart.
I guess Mario Kart. Yeah, I guess Death Race. And Aether Drift, technically, I think Death Race is fine. I think they spread too thin narrative-wise in the actual set.
Yeah.
But
Haunted House.
Haunted House. And I think that we're seeing that Edge of Eternities was just space set. That's the space set. We're getting Lorwyn, which is the set of themes, of types. And so I'm kind of wondering if that's what they're leaning into, is if we're going to go and have this return to sort of typal synergies, right? That's something Commander players care a lot about. And it's, we've talked about, it's another way for you to sort of suppress the optimization in a way, right? You lock these very hyper optimized cards behind these typal synergies.
Sure. Like you're saying with Mox Jasper.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Mox Jasper being tied directly to dragons means that it's not as good as the other Mox cards, but it seems like a very powerful card, but it's used only by dragons.
You can make a best in slot just for dragons, or make a best in slot just for elves, or
it's very possible that we might end up seeing a Mox set like Mox Jasper, but come out in Lorwyn for the different various types.
Or at least one more, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's interesting because I think what's tough for me in this situation. Look, I'm biased. I'm a standard player. I played competitively for 20 years. The thing that I am concerned about at this point, and maybe it's unfounded, only time will tell, is that the thing that concerns me is the players not being motivated by optimization. I think only works as long as the culture of the players, as long as the culture supports that. And as long as all like there's this sort of almost peer pressure for Commander players to not optimize and to like, well, no, you should be playing for fun. You shouldn't be playing to win. Because if you start playing to win, we get into that optimization cycle that doesn't get reset because there's no rotating format anymore. And that leads to CEDH, and CEDH has a whole host of problems and doesn't really function as a competitive format. So that it is weird because we see the rise of CEDH. CEDH is becoming much more popular. There's even like content channels and things that are focused towards CEDH that have become very popular. CEDH attendance is up, right? We're seeing that there is a percentage of players that do want to optimize. It will be interesting to see if that culture starts to permeate, right? We have sort of part of our channel is to talk about this dynamic, right? We're the dynamic between, or sort of the cognitive dissonance between what the systems of Commander are incentivizing you to do and how players are actually playing the game. And part of that is because, we focus on what a system's design is sort of teaching you or telling you to do, right? If you follow the systems, where does that lead you? Because that's what like the designer has control over. You hand over a game to somebody, they read the rules, and that's how they're going to play the game. Right. But that Commander doesn't work that way. Commander is you get introduced to the culture, right? Almost first, probably. You're learning sort of like word of mouth. And if that culture shifts on Wizards of the Coast, what are they left with, right?
Right. I mean, how many more players are going to sort of be pushed into that optimization funnel that's going to create CEDH as this more popular format, which is going to then add more social pressure, cultural pressure on Wizards to try and formalize CEDH, which Wizards then, being good designers, and I believe Wizards probably knows this deep down, that CEDH probably won't work as a formalized format the way that they would have to structure it. And I think that they're not wanting it to be recognized as that. And instead, I think that they'd much rather get Commander players to go and move to something that is much easier to maintain in a tournament structure. And that is leaning more towards 1v1 or, more recently in Two-Headed Giant or 2v2. I
get the feeling that Wizards of the Coast probably isn't even going to touch the competitive side of things. They're just going to let the community figure it out on their own. And,
I'm saying they probably might eventually not have to, I guess, because maybe you don't have to.
If you're sort of left with just those players, though, yeah, I guess that's
right. Like, and especially like if like they jumped on the wagon of competitive play very quickly with 1v1, right? Kind of before the internet was really like taken off, and nowadays, like I'd be interested in seeing CEDH as sort of a grassroots competitive format, right? And so if the views start getting large enough, and if there's enough interest at these tournaments, is Wizards going to be able to ignore that? Or are they going to go, well, no, this is actually something that players might want to see. A lot of people seem to be watching this. It would be an easy win if they started trying to get those content creators or those people that are entering those tournaments and getting them into their own sort of pro tour to help advocate for this particular format.
It is strange. Okay, the one thing I will anecdotally again, but like Gavin Valentine, when he's talking about VV, specifically mentions, we might see this show up in CEDH. And that made me go like, ooh, okay, well, if you're on this, vision design pathway of we are not a competitive format, because if we become a competitive format, this whole kind of thing starts to fall apart, then why would you be motivated to design a card that you think might end up in CEDH, right? At that point, you're designing for optimization, right?
It's tough to say if it was designed with that in mind, or he saw how powerful it was and just thought, maybe. It's hard to say. I think, really, though, the idea of this being powerful enough to be played in CEDH is already like, well, those are really powerful cards.
Sure. Yeah, the most powerful cards ever printed in the game.
I'd say there's a few exceptions in that, Rhystic Study is not going to be as good in 1v1. Right, so it's not going to see that much play probably.
Sure, yeah.
But Rhystic Study is the best card in CEDH. But generally, all individually very powerful cards are played, and so if there's potential for it seeing play in that, why is it going into a standard set? And I think that really this kind of what I think is really interesting is what would Wizards have to print to get people to then go overboard?
What do you mean overboard?
Like VV like drop off, like stop playing the game.
Stop playing. I mean, they're already doing it.
They kind of are, but like
you mean Commander or Standard?
Sure, either. Let's say there's a card that is incredibly powerful and strong, right? That's printed out. Now we could argue VV is that. VV is much less strong without Agatha's Soul Cauldron, right? It's still strong. Don't get me wrong.
Sure,
but
the two of them together are pretty good. So.
Right. But VV is an individually very strong card. Is VV strong enough to get people to be like, this game is done, I'm not going to play anymore? And how many players...
We have already seen the drop-off in tournament attendance and Standard. So
has it been... Is that significant enough, though, to even make a dent on Wizards' profit?
Oh, no. That's what I mean, right? It's like, at this point, profit-wise, I think, of course, Magic can exist without Standard. But the question is that, like, the longevity of the game. If you don't have this rotating format, if you dropped the I guess culture, there's a better term.
The illusion.
Yeah, if you
it
sort
is a
of
bit of an illusion.
Right, like if you drop the illusion that you should be playing in this rotating format and it's good for you as a player, which it is good for you as a player to play in a rotating format.
It's a eat your vegetables mechanic.
Yes, this is a systems eat your vegetables, not a cultural play removal eat your vegetables, right? Yeah. So but once you sort of dropped that culture completely from the game, I don't know if you get that back. I don't know if you say, okay, players, we've ran the course with Commander players and we've reached a dead end and we're ready to loop you guys, you competitive guys, back in. We know you're rip roaring to get back in here, so get on back on the Standard train.
Yeah,
I don't think that's a possibility. I think once it's done, it's done.
Right, and it's tough to say when it will reach that point. They made 200 million in one day on Final Fantasy, but the amount of people they lost from Standard was like a blip in that 200 million.
No, I don't think it has any. Yeah. I don't think they registered for them at all, really. I mean, they went. I think the tournament attendance was cut in half basically since the last event. But it was like, I don't know, it was something like 1,700 players down to 700 players or something. Like, it's a blip.
Yeah. And I mean, it doesn't mean that it can't be addressed, right, and adjusted.
Okay, so let's move to kind of wrapping things up here. So what do we think? After talking this through, does Magic need Standard to survive?
I don't think Magic needs Standard to survive, necessarily. But I do think that, yes, it's a risky play leaning into sort of satisfying the casual audience in the way that they currently are, and especially when it doesn't give them any sort of meaningful data potentially to base their design decisions around. So they need a format to know, what are we basing this the power level of these individual cards on? Because if you're basing it on CEDH now, or really if you're basing it off of casual Commander, that range is anywhere.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, because you really don't have you don't have a target to aim for other than just like what you think players are going to be interested in. Oh, it's a powerful card of the set. Let's make sure it's powerful. The level of power, we have no idea how to evaluate properly because we can't evaluate all 30,000 game pieces.
And I think ideally it would be in their best interest to try and get the card's power level to line up as closely as possible amongst the formats. Obviously, that's not going to happen. We see the difference with Modern to Vintage and Legacy, etc. But I think that when you see Commander cards, they're designed significantly different from Standard, and I think that has caused the most tension amongst the player base.
Yeah, I think that. I think I agree that Magic, I mean, clearly in this moment, Magic does not need Standard to survive. Do I think that Magic needs something like Standard long-term? Probably. It depends if they can maintain the culture of non-optimization. I'm suspect as to whether that can be maintained. I'm also suspect about, if what is the player life cycle now, right? If it used to be about 7 years, is it still 7 years? Has it gone up, gone down? I also think that Magic right now I could see them being hesitant to give up Standard, right? Of course, if they can sort of maintain the illusion that this format is still viable, that they can just sort of continue to keep it going in perpetuity so that if at for whatever reason they needed to pivot back to Standard, it would still be there. players are going to be dropping off in the meantime. They're already dropping off. So at a certain point, maybe it's just not worth keeping it around. I think what's weird is that I think standard and competitive play, in the past at least, I don't know if it's still true, but has given Magic an air of legitimacy. It's given it a, it is the serious card game. It's the card game that is taken very seriously, designed in a very serious way, played in a serious way for serious gamers. And I think that image that they sort of curated for themselves gave them a ton of benefit. It gave them a lot of brand trust by players, that they would know that, like, okay, well, this game is going to have longevity and it's going to be designed well, and I can trust in this game and invest in this game knowing it's going to be here. It's been here for 30 years. It'll be here for 30 more. And I think, we talked about the difference between instrumental and free play, where free play is just, you're just having a fun time of make-believe and there's no rules. Instrumental basically being a sport. And Magic has existed so much in the instrumental side of things that now I think that the player base gives them a lot more leeway as they are sort of opening it up towards the free play side of things, and sort of handing the responsibility over to the players to make sure that the game is balanced for them. If you have a bad time, it's your fault now. Where when it was standard and you were having a bad time in tournaments and things, it was Wizards' fault that you were having a bad time. They were designing it. So I think as long as they can maintain that culture of non-optimization, then they probably don't need standard. But if that switch gets flipped and standard's not there anymore, I think Magic's in a pretty rough spot. But
right. Maybe they can recover, but right now they're on top of the world. So
right, who cares right now?
Right. Enjoy your money pit. Good luck climbing out. If you enjoyed listening to us complain about standard like a couple of boomers, please feel free to give us a little like and a subscribe, maybe a comment down below.
If you're a standard boomer, you can join our Discord. Link is in the description. Also, if you're not a standard boomer, you can also join the Discord. That's okay. We allow anybody in the Discord.
Yeah, I never did a standard tournament.
Except for those people I banned. They're not allowed in the Discord. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.